Good morning. Oh, don't want to do that. Good morning. Viewer, good morning. Welcome to YouTube.com. More specifically, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Austin Paul. And if you're watching this video, thank you. I'm excited for you because this video is a project that I have been working on for weeks now. And it's something that I've had in mind for doing for the spooky season for a few months, which if you're watching this at the time of upload, you know is in full swing right now. Around this time of year, everyone starts talking about their favorite horror media. And I think it is fantastic because horror media is basically my favorite. Movies, YouTube videos like Analog Horror, Wendigoon, all these people that talk about their favorite horror stuff. I'm all for it. And I wanted to throw my hat in the ring too, but I wanted to do it in a way that I felt I could put my own spin on it. Ooh, 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 spooky, ooh, ooh, ooh. What do you have? All right, see ya. So I thought to myself, okay, what do I want to talk about? Well, if you know me in any personal capacity, or if you follow me on any of my other social media platforms, or if you subscribe to me here on YouTube, thank you by the way, you know that I love music, and more importantly, I love talking about music. I love talking about what gets to me about music, what it does to me, how it makes me feel. And there's really not much more visceral a feeling you can have in this world than fear. And so I thought, what if I talk about music that makes me fearful, afraid? What are some pieces of music that are made to get under your skin? So I thought, yes, that sounds like fun. Now, this isn't a original idea, right? There are many lists like these out on the internet. There are many videos like this, but I don't care. I want to talk about it because I think it's so interesting. And I thought this would be a good way to flex my creative muscles, to work on my writing skills, to work on my presentation skills, my analytical skills. So what you're watching right now is part one of a 3-part video series that I have entitled Music as Horror, 15 Haunting Albums. And how it's going to work is like this. This is tier 1 that we're in right now. We're in the intro for it. Each tier will contain 5 albums, 3 tiers total, 15 albums total. Each tier will be reflective of a certain type of horror, each tier becoming progressively more visceral, more uncomfortable, more haunting, more scary, more fucked up, shit that makes you feel fucking gross, okay? So it's going to get a little heavy, but if that sounds interesting to you at all, stick around because I think this will be a slow burn that's worth the wait. Tier 1 I've entitled Something's Watching You. That feeling of dread that something isn't right, but you can't necessarily put your finger on it. Being hyper aware of your surroundings, not knowing what's around the corner. That is the fear that I would like to hone in on for tier 1. So if that sounds fun to you, stick around because we're about to get into our first entry of tier 1. Welcome to the first entry into tier 1. The album we'll be discussing about... The album that we'll be talking about is Ryuichi Sakamoto's Async. Now, hear me out. If you know what this album is, you may be saying, what the hell is this album doing on a horror music tier list? Let me finish, okay? Hear me out. I have my reasons. Reason number 1, it's my video. This is my house. I get to do what I want. It's my birthday, and I get to choose the music. Reason number 2, just as there are many different genres of horror movie, I believe that the many different genres of music can create fear using a myriad of different sounds and stylings. In the 80s, we had slasher movies, Nightmare on Elm Street, Hellraiser, Halloween. In the 90s and in the early 2000s, you had more like thriller horror movies like the Saw franchise. And then we started moving into more supernatural-based horror movies like Possession, The Conjuring universe, Insidious. And if I had to make an argument for what I think is the most popular form of horror movie right now, I would say it's far and away psychological horror, right? Movies like Get Out, Midsommar, The Lodge, The Lighthouse, all of the big names in horror movies right now, all the directors, Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, they're all making psychological horror movies. Movies that build slowly, that creep, that fill you with a sense of chilling dread until it explodes. Bands like Gwar. You have bands like Cannibal Corpse, who are very much akin to an 80s slasher movie, deriving their sense of horror from visceral imagery. Blood, guts, vomit, having sex with corpses, shit like that. Gross. And then you have an album like Ryuichi Sakamoto's Async, which I believe is more akin to a psychological horror. This album will make you feel safe one moment, and then it will slowly start prodding and poking at your brain's need to understand what's going on, and it will uncaringly neglect that need. Async, as well as all of the albums in this tier, derive their sense of fear from the unknown, from the indiscernible. For those of you unfamiliar, Ryuichi Sakamoto was a Japanese composer who was most famous for scoring films like Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, way back in the 80s, and more recently, The Revenant, Leo's bear movie. But when he wasn't scoring films, I believe that Ryuichi Sakamoto was quietly putting out some of the most beautiful, artful, interesting, haunting, chilling compositions that you can hear. On this album, Ryuichi is asking you, how far can you push music until it stops being music? He'll look at a piano and say to himself, what's the most fucked up thing I can do on that guy? Or he'll ask, is meat music? How many wind chimes is too many wind chimes? When is the last time in your life you'll remember that special afternoon from your childhood? The one that has filled you with so many lasting memories and experiences that you carry with you to this day. When will that too fade into obscurity forever? I would describe this album as experimental, ambient, contemporary classical with a little bit of drone and avant-garde. This album opens up with a track called Ondata, which, if I'm being honest, is one of my favorite piano pieces ever. This thing is so beautiful, but it is also so somber. Ryuichi is gently caressing each key of the piano with so much care and precision. And then, a minute into the track, he lets you know what he really has in store for you with this album. The piano slowly gives way to a rising wall of static drone. The piano itself being eaten alive by a church organ that completely takes its place. There are buzzing feedback loops and weird punches of like laser beams and stuff that just doesn't make sense for what you thought this song was going to be. But Ryuichi Sakamoto is not interested in making conventional beauty, but layered, difficult beauty. Beauty that is worth a hard look. The next song is called Disintegration, which takes the same instrument that just made the music on the last track so beautiful, the piano, and Ryuichi completely tears it apart, ripping meat from bone, using those bones to create an entirely new thing that doesn't make sense. This song is so strange. It's just a jumbled hodgepodge of piano notes, flicking of piano wire that doesn't make any sense until you realize that Ryuichi is building worlds with this music. And I think that when you stop trying to figure out what this is and start letting this tell you what it is, then you will understand what makes this album so special. This piece is haunting, it's chilling, it's off the walls, it's indiscernible, but by the end of it, you'll be like, what the fuck is this? I'm trying to be a little bit vague here with the description of this music because I think that this album is best served blindly, right? That's how I experienced it for the first time, and some of the sounds that you'll hear on this thing will send chills down your spine if you're wired at all like I am. These sounds are bewildering, and I believe that they will have an impact on you, but the degree to which they downright scare you may vary. Still, I believe this thing is definitely worth your time, and I think you should give it a listen. Mr. Sakamoto passed away earlier this year in March, and I was very sad when I heard the news, but his music will live on in the hearts of those who have admired his work for decades. May he rest in peace, and let's move on to the second entry of this tier. Okay, gang, for our second album of Tier 1, we have a little number called Geogaddi by a band called Boards of Canada. And while the Boards may be from Canada, the band itself is actually from Scotland. Geogaddi was the electronic duo's second studio album, and it released in early of 2002, which was, if you remember, if you were alive to remember, that was not long after September 11th, which the band actually has been cited as having a partial influence on this album's darker sound compared to their first studio album, Music Has the Right to Children. Upon its release, it was met with widespread acclaim, both commercially and critically, despite its odd, dark soundscapes. If I were to classify this album sonically as like a genre, it would probably be experimental electronic with some dark instrumental hip-hop. There are actually quite a few bops on this thing with tracks like Music is Math and Dawn Chorus. These guys can actually make a really solid beat. And if you listen to this album with some good headphones on, you'll hear just how layered all of the sounds are all over this thing. It is not as simple as you might think. But just when you start getting comfortable with your little head nods and your bops, Geogaddi reminds you that it is always lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect time to strike you with its fever dream aesthetic, reminding you that you are a stranger in a strange land. I would say that the horror of this album, again, like all of the albums in this tier, gets its sense of horror from the unknown and from unpredictability. It reminds me of the feeling that I get whenever I see something that falls into the uncanny valley, which, if you don't know what the uncanny valley is, you are not online enough. You need to get more online. But the uncanny valley is essentially a theory that says at some point in the human evolutional cycle, we evolved to be afraid of something that looks human but is not human. This is why we as people tend to get a little creeped out when we see something like a really humanistic looking robot, but its facial movements aren't right, and we can always tell something's not right, and it gives us a little creepy sensation. That's what the uncanny valley is, and that's what this album sounds like. I get the feeling when I listen to this that it was made by something distinctly inhuman, and it's trying its best to pass itself off as being human, which always gets under my skin a little bit. Despite trying to pass itself off as an album of instrumental breakbeats, whatever inhuman thing made this album, its intrinsic inhumanity makes it impossible to 100% perfectly hide its facade. Sometimes the mask slips. Instead of hi-hats, we get squelching wet sounds of something that is soaking wet. Instead of a snare, we'll have what sounds like latex being stretched across a metal surface and snapping fit. Not to mention the many passages that make use of spoken word, which when I hear them, it just makes me feel like whatever is making this, it's attempting to use recorded human speech in order to communicate with me. But again, that facade slips, and it only serves to make the experience feel more alien. The track "The Devil is in the Details" makes the best use of this for me, in my opinion, and it is by far the most haunting track on this album. It opens with, again, just the wettest, slimiest rhythm section that you've ever heard in your life, while a lone synthesizer plays spots of chords and groans that just echo endlessly into a void. All of this plays backdrop while a woman speaks to you in some sort of like whispered, jarbled, half-intelligible phrases that sound like they could be like forbidden knowledge from some sort of Lovecraftian elder god that, if taken indirectly, would surely cause you to go mad. And all of this while in the background, something that sounds like a small child sings these disjointed, slanted melodies at you. When I hear this, I imagine myself having been abducted on some alien ship that is made entirely out of flesh, and I'm being indoctrinated by whatever is on board. The maniacally slapped percussion on the song Gyroscope was actually so chilling that it was used in the 2012 film Sinister, which is actually one of my favorites. It was used as the score to some of the more disturbing death scenes, essentially. And its uncanniness made for watching those scenes absolutely chill me to my core. And it's the first time that I had ever heard anything from this album, but I didn't realize it at the time. It wasn't until I listened to this album like a few years ago and then came back and watched the movie, I was like, oh shit, this is Boards of Canada. That's sick. Right, okay, so here's the thing with a lot of the sounds that you'll hear in this first tier. It's creepy as shit, but it's also cool as shit. Like, I want more. Like, when I hear this stuff, I want more. And I can't say the same for some of the things that will be coming on further down the line, but for right now, this stuff is so interesting and so cool, I can't help but come back to these sounds. There's a ton of backmasking on this album too, which, if you don't know what that means, backmasking is essentially playing audio in reverse to hide a message to whoever's listening. Think of Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, stuff like that. And by the way, I have always been the key mark for that type of thing being creepy. Like, if I hear music played in reverse, no matter what it is. In fact, like, the happier the better. If I hear like cheery music being played in reverse, I want to die. Like, I don't know what it is, but it's always been that way, and it always will be that way. If you're looking for an album that can give you the good head nods, but then with the very next song have you tensing every muscle in your body, listening to the sound of children laughing as you read the song title, Beware the Friendly Stranger, I think Geogaddi is the album for you. Geogaddi. More like Geodaddy.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Okay. Yes. Yes. I get to talk about James Leland Kirby. If you know me in person at all, you know that for the past 2 or so years, I've been absolutely obsessed with a man named James Leland Kirby, a British electronic ambient artist who, over the past 20 years, has been releasing music under different monikers. His most famous work being a series of albums he released from 2016 to 2020, I believe, entitled Everywhere at the End of Time. Now, this guy is a big deal to me. I love him very much. I love these albums very much. They are very important to me. Everywhere at the End of Time, since about 2020, has garnered widespread notoriety and internet fame, especially, being noted as one of the most haunting, terrifying pieces of music that you can put yourself through. He has garnered widespread praise and notoriety for his works on Everywhere at the End of Time, and he is basically considered to be the masterclass in ambient works, right up there with Brian Eno, John Cage, stuff like that. What he'll do is he'll turn ballroom music from the 1920s and 1930s into these beautiful looping ambient soundscapes that just absolutely mesmerize you. And then slowly he'll take this music and he'll distort it and warp it and wear it down more and more until it is a jarbled, indiscernible mess. He does this with the singular goal in mind of putting the listener into the mind of someone experiencing Alzheimer's disease from its subtle beginnings to its inevitable crushing end. Everywhere at the End of Time has been widely spoken of as one of the most horrifying listening experiences one can put themselves through, and a real test of endurance, as the whole thing from front to back is 6 hours long. But instead of going into that work, which I've already done extensively to the people in my real life and on Instagram and stuff like that, I want to focus on another project of Kirby's. I feel like it fits the tone and the mood of this list much better than Everywhere at the End of Time, because it's much more overt in its unsettling tones and atmosphere. These works came to us from Kirby actually back in 2013, before Everywhere at the End of Time was released, and he released these works under yet a different moniker, The Stranger. The album that we'll be looking at today is called Dead Empires in Decay. Producing under a much more ambiguous and creepier name for sure, The Stranger's music is much more overt in its unsettling and abrasive tonality. I would describe it as dark ambient, using mechanical and industrial sounds and noises, and even like found sounds, like field recordings, to create a soundscape and a world that is just pure chaos. He uses all of these sounds to bring these tracks to life, like a creaking, groaning, lonely, sad life, but a life nonetheless. And this music, at least the first half of this album, sounds like it could literally like straight up be in the movie Eraserhead, which if you haven't seen it, highly recommend if you're a fan of David Lynch. And the album art that we're presented with here does an immensely good job at portraying the world that I imagine I would be inhabiting if I was listening to these sounds in real life. We get this decayed, abandoned, black and white, dim, dark world that sounds like it is constantly being buffeted by some massive windstorm that just never goes away. The first track is entitled We Are Enemies, But Not Here. And I'd like to respectfully disagree. This track is my enemy. James, you are my enemy. We're beefing now, okay? This track is enormously intimidating. It sounds like when I listen to it, I feel like I'm running from my life from some unknown, impossible beast through an abandoned warehouse, while just, again, this non-stop windstorm is buffeting the metal walls of this building. And it makes me feel like I'm hiding from my life in some locker, peering through the slats in the door while this creature slowly passes by, pounding open metal bathroom stall doors looking for me. Yeah, it's a crazy opening track. It really sets the tone early on, letting you know what you're getting into when you start this thing. It's not going to be nice. The Stranger's use of rhythm and percussion here in this first half of the album is very subdued too. Anything that resembles rhythm kind of almost sounds like it's an accident, like could never naturally occur in this world. This is just happenstance that it's happening. Instead of drums, you get some drums, but it's also like pieces of tin smashing together, bones rattling, metal squeaking. Actually, a lot of this music in the first half of this album, I feel like it would fit perfectly with the soundtrack to the Shadow Temple and Ocarina of Time, The Legend of Zelda. But in the middle of the track list, we actually get kind of a nice little reprieve from some of these more abrasive sounds that we've been smashed with for the past half of the album, like the past 25 minutes. We get some incredibly soothing yet really somber ambient work in the song titled Providence or Fate. It kind of reminds me of something that Sigur Rós would put out if they were like more dark. It's like a darker version of that. On this track, you also get some of Kirby's kind of trademark at this point use of superimposed vinyl crackle over this, which is always like a really nice welcome sound for me to hear. And then he keeps things really interesting with the very next track titled Where Are Our Monsters Now? Where Are Our Friends? Where are our monsters now? Where are... You get it. He does something here that I've literally never heard him do before, which is create a hip-hop beat. This thing is so dope. It is slow-tempoed. The kick, the snare, the hi-hats, they all punch super hard. And because the tempo is so slow, you can hear everything just reverberate like what it's really good. And then directly after that song, we get a track titled Gray Dark Drift, I think. Oh, Gray Day Drift, which is another breakbeat, like instrumental hip hop style. But it's kind of putting us back into this chaotic world atmosphere that we've been buffeted by the whole first half of the album. Some of these more chaotic sounds are coming in alongside of the percussion. Hearing what could only be described as like dishware clanking around, or like wood blocks being smacked together, or even like little like ceramic tiles that have been like loosened from a bathroom floor, like someone's shuffling their feet and kicking them around. It sounds kind of like that. Again, we're being put back into this more chaotic atmosphere. The final moments of the album bring us back directly into the more haunting soundscapes. The second to last track is just another chaotic, jumbled mess of industrial mechanical sounds with wind gusting and no rhythm to be had or seen anywhere. It's just dark ambient. And the final track is actually more of that soothing but somber ambient work. It almost sounds kind of tribal. I don't really know how to describe it other than that, but give it a listen. I could really go on forever about James Leland Kirby's work, but for the sake of this video being a million years long, I won't. But if anything that I just said sounds remotely interesting to you, I highly recommend you check out both The Stranger and The Caretaker's work. I think it is some of the most important music out there today, and it's well worth your time, in my opinion. With all that being said, let's move on to album number 4. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached our 4th most album in Tier 1, and this is so cool. I love talking about this. This album will be probably the only use of a soundtrack or a score in this entire video series. Of course, we're talking about the OST, or the original soundtrack, for the 1998 Japanese-only released PlayStation 1 video game, LSD Dream Emulator. Now, I am going to talk a little bit about this video game and its development because it coincides with the development of the soundtrack, right? You make a video game, you also make a soundtrack for it. So, here we go. We all know that feeling of waking up from a dream and thinking to yourself, what the fuck was that? That is the precise feeling that game developer Osamu Sato, right? I think so. That's how you say that, right? Osamu Sato. Sato, Sato, Osamu Sato. I'll figure it out.
Hey kids, Editor Austin here. In the next following portions of this video, I seem to slip in to start saying Osamu Sato, which is not correct at all, and I apologize for it. The young man's name is Osamu Sato. So, I know what it is. I'm sorry I was not saying it right, but I just wanted to pop in here and let you know I learned, okay?
That feeling is what led Osamu Sato to partner with Japanese game development studio Async to create LSD Dream Emulator. One of the employees at the development studio had actually kept a dream journal for 10 plus years. And Osamu didn't want to make classical video games, what you would normally think of as a video game. He said, "Fuck video games. I want to take this PlayStation console and I want to create art with it." And so with a beautiful little 64-bit game console and over a decade-long dream journal in hand, they made magic. In this game, you walk, look, touch. That's it. There's no combat, there's no dialogue, there's no anything that would resemble what you would classically think of as video game activities in LSD. You simply wake up in your dream, walk around until you find something that looks interesting to you, touch it, and then get warped into a different level of the dream. You repeat this process over and over again until your character naturally wakes up, or you do something like walk over the side of a cliff and jolt yourself awake, like would happen in real life. And at the end of each level, your dream gets charted onto a graph that has a cross in here and then like a grid. So it's static, dynamic, depressive, and happy, or something like that. And the music also coincides with these dreams, with these placements. Like, there are some more relaxed songs on this soundtrack. There are some more hyperactive songs on this soundtrack. There are some that are sporadic and joyful, and some that are low-key and oppressive in their depressing nature. But they are all extremely uncanny in their own unique ways. Imagine this. You wake up in a dream, and you find yourself in a house that is covered floor to ceiling in the same repeating image of a strange-looking woman's face. All the while, this is playing. There have been many times while playing this game for myself where I have to stop and rub my skin because the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up straight so intensely. It gives you the heebie-jeebies. I think this is the ultimate expression of uncanny music. Osamu Sato did an excellent job of replicating the experience of listening to somebody's subconscious mind piece together what it thinks music is based on what it's heard in its waking life day in and day out, but it doesn't really have all the tools necessary to do that. Right? How many times have you heard someone describe their dream to you saying something like, "Oh, you were there, but you weren't really you, you didn't look like you," or "Yeah, I was at the grocery store, and then it turned into my house, and then I went into the bathroom, and I was in a strip club," or something like that. I love this idea of our brains trying to replicate the information that it takes in every day while we're awake and walking around, but it just can't because it's the subconscious mind. It is like that ever-present little thing. It's unknowable. I don't know what the hell it is. Does anyone know what it is? I don't know. But when it tries to make music, it gets wild. There is a formula here with this music. Oftentimes, a lot of these songs will have this subaquatic sounding, droning booming happening on like the undercurrent. It sounds like someone is shooting like a razor lay gun. A razor lay gun? Shooting a laser ray gun or like blasting a subwoofer at like the deep end of a public pool. You hear like this, like it's an undercurrent through the entire song. And then on top of that are like these glitchy, crystalline, cloudy synth pads that just go off on these little like motifs that just loop. It's the same 2 to 10 second loop over and over and over again. And these songs don't have any dynamic range to them. Again, it's a loop. So when a song starts, it's like you turned it on in the middle of something. But it's not. It's just the same thing carrying over. It's kind of maddening, really. It kind of drives you insane. But when you really like sit and listen to it, it can be really creepy at times. Most of these songs will have a slow fade out. And so when the next one starts, it's just abrupt and it's so jolting. And the sounds are so discordant and unorganized and uncanny. It takes your brain like a couple seconds to be like, whoa, like it gets jump scared. It's like, what's going on? And it's not because like it's too loud or it's like, I don't know. It's just being slapped in the face by something that is not right. And your brain just takes a second to be like, whoa, what's this? That's what listening to this album is like. And it's going to be like that for a long time because this thing on YouTube is 3+ hours long. It's almost 3.5 hours long.
Kids, at work Austin here. Major discovery just discovered. Okay, so I was listening to the LSD Dream Emulator OST today while working, and I looked into the channel that uploaded the video that I've been listening to for the past couple weeks. Turns out it's only one of 4 videos that contain the entire OST. I've only been listening to the ambient versions of all these songs. There are cartoonish versions, there are electronic, like dancier versions, there are like ethno versions, like world instruments and stuff like that. This thing is huge. This thing is like 15 hours at this point. I can't believe that when I was listening to this, initially I was like, I feel like there's more music than this normally, like a different variety, and I was right. I was only listening to like 1/4 of this OST. That's crazy. I highly recommend you guys check out the YouTube channel Sato Archive, I believe it's called. They have uploaded the whole OST, all 4 different types of music. I can't explain enough how vast the soundtrack is and how wildly differing the music is. This only gets me more excited about this album. You gotta listen to it. It's crazy, like absolutely insane. And yes, very creepy, very bone-chilling. So I just wanted to pop in here and tell you about that. Let's get back to the video.
And I understand that some people may find this music more abrasive or annoying rather than scary, but I think you cannot deny the fact that it ain't right. Like something's not right here, and it makes you feel like this creeping, for me, it makes me feel this creeping sensation of like something is not right here. What is this? And it like has me like looking over my shoulder, right? If that interests you at all, give this album a try. Click through it if you want. Fine. What's really cool about this album is like you never know what's coming next. So like it's just unpredictable. It keeps me like I want to know what's the next song, what's the next thing gonna be like, and it almost always just makes me go, that's the next song. Like that's the sensation of listening to LSD Dream Emulator. That's the sensation of listening to LSD Dream Emulator. I highly recommend you give it a shot. And without further ado, we are now moving on to our 5th and final album for Tier 1. Let's go! Okay, kids, we are at our 5th and final album for tier 1 of this list. This final album is, well, it's something. That's for damn sure. Our final record came to us way back in 1987 by a band called Nurse with Wound. This group has actually been putting music out for decades, since 1979 in fact, with their first album being titled Chance Meeting on a Dissecting Table of a Sewing Machine and an Umbrella. But the album in question for today is titled Drunk with the Old Man of the Mountain. Nurse with Wound are prolific, to say the least. Wikipedia cites that they have released over 40 albums in their discography. They have been described as avant-garde, experimental, ambient, dark ambient, drone, stuff like that. As you can tell, there's a theme with this tier. It's a lot of ambient, a lot of experimental electronic music, and that's kind of for a reason. I don't think it can be overstated how far ahead of its time this group is musically. Bro, this album came out the same year as Never Gonna Give You Up. This album is, I don't know what this album is. I don't know what any of this shit is, and I'm fucking scared. Is it music? It's something. There is one thing I know for sure about this album, and that it is something. All up and down this album, you get something. That's for fucking sure. I would describe these tracks as avant-garde absurdism with a specific bent towards being terrifying. Throughout the 5 tracks of this album, you will hear sounds such as ragtime piano, women hyperventilating, dudes gagging, some guy repeating the phrase sewer rat or swamp rat over and over again. More women hyperventilating, the ghost girl from the movie The Grudge, and much, much more. These tracks are all quite long too. The shortest 2 tracks being over 5 minutes long, the longest 2 tracks being over 12 minutes long, and the final track being 9 minutes long. What's interesting though is that all these tracks, while being their own individual entities, they don't sound separate from each other. Every song on this album has its own unique individualized feel, but you never really know when one ends and when one begins. They all just kind of flow through each other. There are moments when Nurse with Wound will crank the dial that controls your brain squirming up to 20 and let it sit there for minutes on end, just until you're about to go insane and turn it off, and then it will slowly turn it back down and kind of lull you into a hypnotic sense of comfort. This dull groan that hypnotizes you into like a one-eyed open, half awake, half sleeping sensation, only for them to just go right back up again. The track Sheila Nagig, it's a dangerous one. It sounds to me like what could only be described as the sound that you would hear if you accidentally stumbled upon a coven of witches in the middle of the woods at 3 a.m., watching them dance naked in the light of a bonfire while they perform some dark, horrible ritual. If you've ever seen the movie The Witch, it reminds me of that a lot, actually. Whether it's loud and chaotic or subdued and sinister, disorientation and discombobulation is the name of the game with Nurse with Wound. Their mastery over crafting material that will always keep you on your toes is, to me, what makes their work so intriguing and, for the most part, so horrifying. As I was doing research for this video, I listened to this album twice back to back, and I will say that at the end of my second listen, I was more than ready to turn it off. It's just not nice to listen to, like at all. I mean, I've been kind of saying it throughout this video, but the horror here comes from the indiscernible. the unintelligible, not knowing what's coming around the corner, that ambiguous nature of this music just makes my skin crawl. I know I've said that a lot, but it just does. And comparatively to the rest of the albums on this list, I think that Nurse with Wounds, Drunk with the Old Man of the Mountain is the perfect symbiosis of that idea. I think it's the perfect execution, which is why I've put it 5th on our list, just before crossing the boundary into tier 2. If you are in the mood, I recommend you give it a listen. Guys, I want to thank you so much for watching tier 1 of my Music as Horror 15 Haunting Album series. Thank you so much for being here. Please be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you liked this content. Like the video. Give me a comment on, have you ever listened to any of these albums? What did you think about them? Do you agree with me? Do you have anything else to say? I would love to hear it down in the comments. My name is Austin Paul. Thank you so much. I cannot wait to show you part 2 of this video. It's in the works right now as we speak. I will see you there, my friend. Bye-bye. What was this? Bye-bye. Bye-bye.